again. This time we're talking about human resources. We spent a lot of time talking about different issues within the budget process, right? So at the beginning of the course, we focused a lot on creating a mission statement, sort of identifying some key objectives and strategic plans that you want to start thinking about as you create this agency. And then we get into the cost of starting the agency. What is it going to be to build it, et cetera. But now the second half of the course really focuses more on the human resource part of the conversation. And in this one, we're going to be talking a little bit about how we unpack ideas related to public administration and leadership. So today, we're diving into Chapter 7 of Human Resource Management in the Public Service by Berman, Bowman, and West, and Van Wart. We're focusing on one of the most complex and debated aspects of human resources, HR, and this is compensation in the public sector. Now, keep in mind as you go through all this, there's no way we can get into extreme detail. And the purpose of the mini lecture is really to get you focused on the areas we'd like you to spend a little time on in the reading and making sure that you really focus in on these particular points. So what I'm going to do for the next couple of minutes is just hit a high-level conversation around some of the issues and concerns in creating compensation in the public sector. So compensation is more than just a paycheck. In the public sector, it plays a central role in attracting, retaining, and motivating employees. But it also has to balance fairness, budget constraints, and public scrutiny. Today, we're going to explore the theories behind compensation, how pay is determined, the public-private sector debate, and common tools and the trade-offs, and what an ideal compensation system might look like. Start off with this whole thought about equity and expectancy. Let's start with the theoretical backbone. Equity theory and expectancy theory. Equity theory suggests that employees compare what they contribute to their job, like time, effort, and skills, with what they receive in return. They compare that to a ratio to others around them. If they feel shortchanged, motivation tends to drop. Expectancy theory adds another layer. It says motivation depends on 3 beliefs. First, that your effort will lead to good performance. Second, that this performance will be rewarded. And third, that the reward has value to you. If any of these beliefs break down, so does motivation. We talked a little bit last week about the concept of motivation. I'm not going to get into great detail here, but there's a lot to be said for the intrinsic value of what you do. Public administrative types, those that serve in the public service are not necessarily motivated by the money. It's nice to have it. The more, the better. But a lot of us entered in the public service, and specifically public safety, because there was other benefits related to it that created value for you. But as that first one talked about, there has to be some equity in how this goes, and you must feel that you're getting rewarded appropriately. So together, these two theories underscore the importance of fair, transparent, and meaningful compensation. Pay determination factors? Well, there are a few core drivers behind how compensation is set. The first philosophy, does the organization want to lead the market, match it, or lag behind? And I remember working for Arlington that there was always a lot of conversation around whether you're going to lead the market or match it. Our county philosophy tended to be match it, never be behind, but don't be too far ahead. The choice shapes your competitive position in attracting talent. Next is the labor forces, or I should say the labor market forces. Things like the cost of living, demand for skills, and legal minimums. These external pressures define boundaries for what we should pay and what that pay should look like. For those of you that perhaps may work in an urban area where there is commuting costs, there is very high cost of living, there are a lot of tax base, the competitive market gets really difficult to have the funds necessary to get people to the job that you want. And the cost of living really impacts that, but it varies across the country. I remember being in Monterey, California, and an officer in Monterey, California at the time was starting at $101,000 a year, where officers where I worked were starting at $60,000 a year. And you think, wow, what a disparity. But it all was driven by what were the costs associated with living there. I don't think the officers in Monterey, frankly, were living that much better than the ones in Arlington based upon cost of living. Of course, then there's job content. Internally, organizations rely on job evaluations to maintain consistency and equity between roles. It helps avoid awkward situations like a supervisor earning less than a subordinate, perhaps. And finally, we consider individual contributions, merit pay, bonuses, skill-based pay, longevity pay, and the cost of living adjustments are all levers to reward and retain valuable employees, but each comes with its own implementation challenges. So the perennial payday debate, here's where things get political. Are public employees overpaid or underpaid compared to the private sector workers? Well, it depends on how you measure it. Public jobs often come with strong benefits, better job security and pension systems, but sometimes lower base salaries. And let's not forget the intrinsic motivation that comes with public service. Still, public sector's workers especially may feel undervalued when they see the private counterparts earning more for similar work. The challenge is balancing financial or fiscal reality with public service values. And of course, there's a lot to be said about that last couple of sentences, comments I made, especially when it comes down to long-term benefits. If you still work in an organization that has defined benefits at the end of a 25 or 30-year career, which are becoming less and less in the country, that's a real value for somebody. But I often think about how difficult it is to get a 25-year-old who's just starting out in public safety or public service to realize the long-term benefits when the immediate money could be better in the private sector. And how do you sort of entice or manage that? Just a thought. Compensation tools and the paradox is, compensation strategies are supposed to motivate and retain staff, but many come with built-in contradictions. Let's take merit pay, for example. Merit pay intends to reward strong performance, but in a unionized environment or team-based roles, it can feel diversive or subjective. Pay binding offers flexibility without clear communication. Employees might suspect favoritism or inconsistency. When we think about cost of living increases and longevity pay are stable and predictable, but they may not incentivize excellence. So public HR professionals must walk a fine line between fairness, simplicity, and meaningful differentiation. Help if I can speak. So how do you design the ideal compensation system, and what does a good compensation look like? First, it should align with your organization's mission and strategic goals. If you want innovation, your pay structure needs to support that. It should also be internally fair and externally competitive. That means it makes sense within your organization to keep you viable in the labor market. Of course, compliance with legal standards is non-negotiable, but equally important is how the system is perceived. Transparency and trust matter as much as the numbers. And finally, there needs to be adaptable. The program must adapt. The workforce expectation and economic realities change, and your compensation strategy should evolve along with them. I think about how important it is we talk about transparency and accountability from our role outward into the public, and how incredibly important that very same concept is internally when we have our dealings with our budget process and we have our dealing with our HR personnel, are they being transparent? Are they being inclusive in the decision-making process and how that plays out? Some things just occur over and over again throughout the entirety of this program, and trust and transparency and accountability are three that do over and over. So human resources, so what are some of the implications? So what are the key takeaways for HR professionals in the public sector? First, compensation is both a technical and a strategic issue. It requires balancing motivation, equity, and legality. Second, no system is perfect. Regular evaluation, employee feedback, and transparent communication are key to keeping your compensation plan relevant and fair. So a couple things for you to think about. And when we get to live sessions, maybe we perhaps delve in these a little bit. As you reflect on the material from this week's reading, what compensation tools have you seen work well or not work at all? How should public agencies address perceptions of pay equity? Should public compensation systems mirror private ones or take a different approach entirely? These aren't necessarily easy questions, but they're essential for anyone working or studying in the public human resources arena.